Good afternoon. My presentation is about enterprise risk management. My supervisors are Dr. Amama Shaukat from Brunel University and Dr. Thaira Shirawi from Ahliya University. I was involved in the introduction of ERM and GPIC. GPIC is a petrochemical complex in Bahrain. The company has a culture of exchanging knowledge with other petrochemical companies in the region. During knowledge exchange visits with other petrochemical companies in the region, I have found that the ERM framework as adopted in GPIC differs in terms of concept and contents with other petrochemical companies in the region. Although almost most companies have identical technologies, organization structure, and culture, the risk management processes was different. Many companies were not happy with the COSO ERM framework. COSO is the most widely used ERM framework globally, and many companies decided to switch over from COSO to ISO and other frameworks. When GPIC decided to switch over from COSO to ISO, it gave me the impetus to dig deeper into each of these frameworks to understand their disparity and the reasons for preference of one over the other. I have reviewed the existing literature and found that there is a general agreement that there should be a new framework to address the existing limitations, and I have found that each of these frameworks has good aspects and limitations as well. I'm very keen to research into the issue, not only with the limited exposure into the petrochemical companies, but also to seek a wider response from other oil and gas industries in the region as well. The end purpose will be to draw a conclusion and come up with a comprehensive framework to overcome these limitations. The agenda of my presentation will be the concept of risk and risk management, the evolution of risk management frameworks, assessing dynamics of current ERM frameworks, evaluation of gaps, limitations, and finally recommendations for an ideal comprehensive framework. There is a famous saying which clearly emphasizes the element of risk in any business activity, and I quote, "A ship is safe in the harbor, but that is not its purpose." A business risk is not necessarily a hazard or a negative activity. The correct definition would be an event or a group of unforeseen events and uncertainties, the consequence of which results in the non-achievement of business objectives. At the earlier days, companies sought the easy way out to manage risks by transferring them to insurance companies at a cost known as insurance premiums. These days, this is not practical due to business complexities and changing business environments. Since risks are interrelated, it is necessary that an integrated framework to be established and created to manage risks at a corporate level. Therefore, many professional bodies throughout the world came up with different ERM standards. For example, the Cadbury and Turnbull report in the United Kingdom, which included governance requirements for strategic risk management in enterprises, the Control and Transparency Act in Germany, the Treadway Commission in the United States, which delegated the task to a committee of sponsoring organizations known as COSO, which came initially with an integrated framework for internal controls. Then at a later stage, they developed a framework for ERM. Other standards by other countries like COCO in Canada, the Japanese standards, the Australian and New Zealand standard, which was at a later stage adopted by the International Standards Organization, which is known today as ISO, and resulted in the development of ISO 31000. Other famous and popular standards are introduced by Risk Insurance and Management Society and the Casualty Actuarial Association. Now let's talk about the most popular framework, COSO. COSO was established in 1987 and headed by Coopers and Liebrandt. The firm is a major accounting firm which at a later stage merged with another major accounting firm and changed its name to what we know today as PricewaterhouseCoopers. As I mentioned in the previous slide, COSO developed an ERM framework. The cube is the COSO frameworks, and the three facets represent the COSO attributes. Since the proponents of both COSO committees were accounting firms and statutory auditors, corporations were persuaded by their accounting and auditing firms to implement the COSO framework. However, the framework was very complex, costly to implement. It was huge, over 150 pages, other than the guidelines which are included. Companies found it difficult to implement the COSO on their own. So the same auditors were appointed by many organizations as implementation partners. Since it was thrust upon corporations by their boards and top management, the framework did not find acceptability lower down the workforce ranks. Another famous framework is the Risk Insurance and Management Society, comprising of insurance experts. The framework was published in 2006, which had the content and risk quantification methodology. The framework is famous of assigning values to risks, and their model is called the Risk Maturity Model. Another society called the Casualty and Actuarial Society, which has members specializing in actuarial services for risk pricing and loss reservation. The model leverages skills at risk analysis and evaluation and prioritization of risks. They are famous of applying the principles of probability mathematics to assess risks and the risk impacts. Companies which are familiar with the flow charts methodology, which is usually used by the International Standards Association, such as ISO 9000 for quality, found it simpler to comprehend the flow charts methodology proposed for ERM in the Australian and New Zealand framework in 1994. 5 years later, the Australian and New Zealand Standards Association issued another framework called the 4360, which was issued in 1999. This draft was at a later stage adopted by the International Standard Association and resulted in the development of the ISO 31000. This framework is considered by many corporations to be the gold standard for all other ERM standards. It is simple, easy to comprehend, and cost-effective to implement. Hence, many organizations who were unhappy with COSO adopted the ISO 31000. GPIC and other petrochemical complexes in the region as well have done the same. Based on the foregoing, we can see that there are different proponents of ERM from various backgrounds, such as accountants, finance, risk insurance, actuarials, which caused a wide disparity in the frameworks, leading to differing attributes, forecasts, and risk inventories. A risk inventory is a master register where all risks for an entity are listed. As I mentioned, when the contents of the risk inventory at GPIC was compared to other inventories in the region, there was no commonality, despite possessing similar technologies and products. This was an evidence that the ERM frameworks failed to identify risks in a uniform manner. Limitations and gaps. The main limitation in COSO framework that it is built on internal controls. Internal control is just a process designed to provide reasonable assurances for the achievement of objectives, and it is not enough to manage all risks. Since COSO framework is imposed on organizations mainly through audit firms due to its complexity, these firms or their agents are appointed consultants to implement. Since organization risks are best known to the insiders, the consultants cannot do justice. Where insiders' views are taken into account, these views come from various sections and departments. The risks tend to be collated in silos. Risks interrelated between departments may not be captured. This defeats the purpose of ERM management. Third, the COSO literature is huge and complex, hence difficult and costly to implement. COSO document includes terms such as risk response, risk treatment, risk tolerance, which are theoretical and not practical because there is no component to explain how risks are quantified and monetized. Current frameworks do not provide for communicating the extent and nature of risks to the stakeholders and the measures taken by management and resources spent to mitigate the risks. Most of these limitations are taken from the existing literature, and there are other limitations as well. Recommendations for an ideal and comprehensive framework. Despite limitations and gaps, it is important to persist with the concept of risk management framework to make the organization resilient and sustainable. Rather that a revised comprehensive ERM framework is put in place which overcomes all or most of the limitations. Better frameworks would have been achieved by pooling of resources, not just accounting and auditing firms, but also other professionals from academia or from the professional organizations as well, such as risk managers in other industries. The format of the new framework should be simple to comprehend and have the element of standardization to achieve uniformity across industries and regions. The process should include evaluation of risk by quantifying and monetizing it. Compilation of an inventory register should have a uniform basis, and a mechanism should exist for sharing the inventory list between organizations, especially from the same industry and region. The entire exercise of risk management is not just to benefit the management. A mechanism should exist for the benefit of stakeholders. Lastly, the new framework should be standardized to lend itself to certification by agencies such as ISO. I propose to validate and reinforce my views through feedback from a research survey. I'm currently in the process of drafting Chapter 2. The main contribution will be toward the need to standardize and determine a comprehensive ERM framework that is comparable between organizations. This can lead to a risk inventory that can be compared between similar organizations to ensure that no major risk is overlooked. Ultimately, if the risks are comparable between similar organizations, it would be possible to determine the optimal risk management mechanism that can deal and mitigate these risks. Thank you.